Cyclist versus pedestrian, who was in the wrong, how would claims be made? This one might just melt the brains a little bit of the anti-cycling brigade. The most common comment on this video is that the cyclist should be riding on the road and not on the pavement, but the usual complaint from the anti-cycling brigade is that cyclists should be using cycle lanes whenever they're available, and this cyclist was. In the video we can see that the cyclist was proceeding along the cycle lane, which is also a shared path with pedestrians. We can see at the start of the video very clearly that it is indeed a cycle lane. So we've determined that the cyclist is where most people would want them to be, and then the pedestrian comes out from a little cut into the path of the cyclist and they collide. This knocks over both the pedestrian and the cyclist. Now obviously pedestrian versus cyclist situations aren't where my experience lies, but I don't think you have to be a brain surgeon to realise that if any claims are made, the pedestrian will probably be found responsible. As you would imagine, this would probably be treated similar to a T-junction in a car versus car scenario. The cyclist is proceeding along an established cycle lane. They're being conscious of other road users in the shared walkway that is visible. The pedestrian involved in the collision has shown no regard to cyclists that could be using the shared cycle lane. They've walked straight out of the little cut onto the shared space cycle lane without checking if it was safe to join. Now you might say that the pedestrian wouldn't know that it was a cycle lane, and you'd have a 1% chance of being correct and 99% chance of being wrong. Think about it. How often do you walk around areas that you don't know, especially little cuts from blocks of flats onto main road routes? So the chances are that they did know it was a shared cycle and pedestrian path and has probably walked that way thousands of times without incident. Or they could of course be a random tourist in Melton Mowbray blindly following Google Maps. There is always a 1% chance of that, I guess. Now, who is going to pay for the damages and injuries if there is any? Let's assume that the cyclist here doesn't have specific cycling insurance that would help them make a claim from the pedestrian. Both of them, if they live in a house with contents insurance, will have cover in place to be able to pay the third-party damages. This is because public liability or personal cover is provided with most contents insurance policies, and that will cover you if you cause accidental damage to something or someone outside of the house. It's how if a cyclist damages your car, more often than not, if they don't have specific cycling insurance, you would likely be able to claim any damage costs back from their contents insurance policy. And before anybody starts saying that this is an optional extra, again, you've got a 1% chance of being right, 99% chance of being wrong. Over the past decade and a half of doing this professionally, I'm yet to encounter a contents policy where public liability or personal cover, whichever wording the insurer wants to use for it, is an optional extra. It's always usually included as standard. Of course, there is always a 1% chance that a contents insurer does have it as an optional extra, but they'd have to be a mighty niche and small company for me to have not come across them. In this case, if the pedestrian has contents insurance for their home, the cyclist will be able to claim against that for any injuries or damage to the bicycle or belongings. This also isn't to be confused with specific insurance add-ons for bicycles or cycling. This is something that comes as standard on most contents policies. It's rarely used for instances like this, but it can be. So, cyclist versus pedestrian, a first for my page, but a pretty easy one to decipher. Lovely jubbly, sound as a pound.